Hello everybody, and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my first episode of New Album Spotlight in the new year, so I'm excited to dive into it. There's been a notable release that I just can't help but talk about. It's been a little bit of an unusual release perhaps, so I haven't been sure how to approach it on the channel, but I decided since I love it and I want to talk about it, I'm going to do a video about it. So here we go into one of my favorite new records of the year so far, even though we're only a couple weeks in. This is the front runner for me, and this is Echolyn and their albums TimeSilentRadio vii and TimeSilentRadio vii. And Echolyn are one of my favorite bands that I've been following for many, many years. They formed back in 1989. They're from the US. They disbanded in 1995 and reformed in the year 2000, and that's kind of been their current iteration. So they have basically two periods of the band: their early years with their self-titled record and Suffocating the Bloom, and then As the World, which gained some attention at the time back in 1995. In this early period, they definitely had a lot of influence from Gentle Giant, but had a sound that was all their own, a little bit more quirky and varied and off the wall and a little bit more energetic back in those early days. But they reformed in 2000 with Cowboy Poems Free, and I feel like they matured a bit. They do music that has a bit more of an influence in kind of an Americana singer-songwriter vein and a bluesy rock kind of style with little touchstones of prog here and there. Definitely still retain some of that Gentle Giant influence, but very much a more streamlined, accessible sound to them that's very matured and showcases that the band's growing throughout their careers together. So this album is interesting because it's 10 years since the release of their previous record, I Heard You Listening. So it's been a long time coming, and a lot of fans have been eagerly anticipating the album. They've shown a lot of activity in the studio and what they've been working on throughout that period, and there's been promises of new material, but it hasn't quite materialized up until this point. And they decided to start a Kickstarter campaign to get their album out there, to get people to pre-order it basically, and to buy into the album so that they could have the money to finish mixing the album and mastering it and getting it ready for release. Unfortunately, they didn't meet their goal on the Kickstarter, but they did start their own campaign, their own pre-order campaign on their website, essentially, which had the same caveats to it, the same rewards and perks as the Kickstarter did. So it didn't feel much different as a consumer, but it was just a way for the band to take care of it themselves rather than relying on Kickstarter. So and I bought into it. I bought the digital version of the album. There was basically two tiers that were purchasable. One was the digital tier, and then the other was the physical CD tier. And the digital tier and the physical CD tier promised the album in a digital form on January 1st. And the physical CDs actually aren't coming much until later in March, which is basically the wider release of the album when most people will be able to buy it and hear it in whatever format they desire. So, but since I pre-ordered it, I got to hear the album on January 1st, and I've been listening to it ever since. And it's kind of a cool release because I don't have a lot of other music to contend with because there haven't been many new releases yet this year. It's a little early for most of the big releases to be coming out. Really, the first major one on my calendar is Dream Theater, which isn't until February 7th. So it gives me a lot of space to be able to focus in on this album in particular. And it's been quite a great time. I'll admit, when I first listened to the record, I was a little bit underwhelmed with it. I thought it was a little bit weaker than what I consider to be their modern masterpiece, which is their Windows album, their untitled album from 2012. Fantastic record. It just has 8 tracks to it, but each one is fantastic and unique in its own right. It just has this beautiful quality to it, and the musicianship and the songwriting craft is just up to another level from my ears. And I didn't feel like this quite matched up to that as well, but it's a grower of an album. The more I listen to it, the more the layers are uncovered. And now I think it stands alongside their 2012 album, and they're pretty equivalent in my eyes on quality level, and this one maybe even continuing to grow and even surpass their 2012 album, so that means a lot in my eyes. So it's a really cool release. It's a lot of material. Basically, they released 2 albums at once, and it's split up with one being more of the shorter, more accessible tracks, and then the other disc being the 2 big epics. So they're both like 45-minute albums, so total you get about a 90-minute project here between the 2. And the lineup here that we have is Brett Cole on guitar, lead vocals, and backing vocals, Ray Weston on lead vocals, bass, and backing vocals, Chris Busby on keys and backing vocals, and Jordan Perlson on drums, percussion, and backing vocals. One of the key characteristics of the band, and it has been since their inception, is their vocal harmonies and blends. And as you can tell with their influence by Gentle Giant, they have a lot of these cool swirling harmonies and things that they do. Back in the day, they do a bit more of like the kind of vocal rounds and things that Gentle Giant would do. That's not quite as present here, but they still have some moments of swirling vocal trickery and great harmonies and just beautiful, sumptuous vocal blends that I just really love as I listen to the record. To me, that's one of the highlights of their sound. And like I mentioned, it's pretty hard to define their sound, really. And I found it hard to really describe these songs and to really detail what they sound like, because they have a sound that's unique and all of their own. Maybe a bit of an influence of Americana singer-songwriter, some blues rock in there, some typical prog influences, like I've mentioned Gentle Giant, but of course you may hear little bits of like Yes and even Genesis in that mix. Some people mention Kansas as an influence they hear from the band. But they meld it in such a way that it just sounds uniquely them. And I feel like Gentle Giant really had that aesthetic back in the 70s, where they didn't really sound like any particular other band. They had influences, they picked up styles from different genres of music and melded it into something new and something wholly unique in their own. And I think another way that they're similar bands is that Gentle Giant on paper might seem like it's a little too dissonant, a little too quirky, a little too oddball. The melodies maybe sometimes don't seem to connect quite well enough to some people, but if you keep listening, if you let it wash over you, if you really solve the puzzles as you listen, it all comes together and somehow becomes catchy and hooky, even though it's this complicated puzzle of different musical pieces that may seem disparate and separate on their own. And I think Echolyn does this as well. Like, a lot of their sounds can sometimes veer into dissonance, into stuff that's a little avant-garde and a little strange, but it's all beautiful in the context of the song. It all fits together and makes for some really catchy, beautiful moments that really captivate me as a listener and that bring this like key emotion to all of their music. And it's just a beautiful magic trick that they're able to pull off, to both be proggy and complex and interesting and unique, but also to be catchy and memorable and to be nostalgic in a way and to bring this kind of great melody to the forefront. And it's just an incredible blend of music that I just really love and adore. And like I mentioned, the structure of the album took some getting used to, that it's on one hand, one disc, the more shorter accessible tracks, and the other disc, more of the longer form epics. This reminded me of how Neil Morse band's Innocence and Danger was set up in a similar fashion, and part of me kind of wished things were mixed a little bit together and that it felt more of a cohesive project, and maybe that feels the same here. But of course, if you're considering these two separate albums, then it kind of makes sense that they'd be separated in this fashion. But to me, you know, they're releasing it all at once, and so for me it feels like one continual project, but divided into two halves in kind of a strange fashion. But it allows the listener to kind of digest one disc at a time. Like, that's kind of was my approach, was to take one disc. I started with Time Silent Radio 7, which is the shorter tracks, and really dialed into it, listened to it a few times on repeat, and really got a feel for these songs on their own. And it really was a great experience to just let these tracks resonate before I really dove deep into the epics on the second disc. And there's some wonderful tracks here that span from some bluesy rock tracks to some more like laid back, more melodic, more almost psychedelia tinged tracks as well. Some of my standouts, I love Cul-de-sacs and Tunnels, which gives this kind of emotional ballad-like quality. Wonderful swirling vocal harmonies. It reminds me of tracks from the 2012 album I mentioned, like When Sunday Spills perhaps is a good a reference point, but it picks up pace halfway through with a more breezy feel and some strummed acoustic guitar. Very classic new Echolyn sound to this one, and it's just a fantastic journey. It's a 7-minute track that runs the gamut between this more fantastic, beautiful, ballad-esque melody to these more fast-paced, more rocky sections, and I think it's a great blend of what they do well. My favorite track on this disc, though, is Tiny Star, which I think is just a fantastic piece with some uplifting melodies right off the bat, a breezy acoustic feel that ramps up to a Beatles-esque chorus, and almost a power pop, bouncy feel to it. I love when it settles back into this lovely kind of laid back section and adds some female vocals into the mix, and we get a bit of a psychedelic breakdown with some avant-garde strangeness with kind of weird off-kilter drums and piano and harmonies before the beautiful melody kicks back in. I think it's a great effect that you feel a little bit lost at sea with all these disparate avant-garde type sounds, but anchored by the beautiful harmonies and melodies. And then when the full melody kicks back in, it just brings a wave of beauty and emotion washing over you and feeling like you're home and like you're grounded once again after this kind of disparate section. So fantastic track, one of my favorite all-time Echolyn tracks, Tiny Star, which they released early. They released it on, I believe, December 25th as a little bit of a bonus for those who'd pre-ordered the record. So fantastic track, one of my highly recommended ones. But every track on this is fun. Radio Waves is a great opener that breezes along with a great hard rocking feel, almost like a Boston-esque classic rock feel in the interludes with that like strumming acoustic guitar. Silent Years has some cool kind of tinkling sounds and psychedelic guitars and dissonant melodies, but continues in a very upbeat style vein. Boulders on Hills has a classic bluesy sound with some prominent organ in the beginning and a cool hard rocking chorus. Love the instrumental breaks that bring some sublime harmonies and some laid back feelings to it. And so every track has its own unique quality and it all works together. It has that clear Echolyn sound at the same time and is just fun to listen to. And that's really what I love about them, is just you can put it on and it's just ear-catching, it's pleasant, there's nothing too off-kilter that throws you off, but it's unique enough that it doesn't sound like a pastiche of a bunch of different artists that you've heard before. So excellent how they pull this off, and I just really love it. And they don't do like show-offy virtuoso soloing. They really only do things that service the song. And that is really well appreciated as well, that they're really thoughtful. And that's where the maturity in the songwriting comes from, in my opinion. So then you get the two epics on the second disc. You get Time Has No Place, which is like 16 and a half minutes, opening with some interesting noise and chatter before a fantastic opening melody. Great like overture style here with some ominous heavy vibes, some church organ, some off-kilterness, but then it settles on an acoustic guitar and harmony vocals before we get some of these strange discordant harmonies. It's a fantastic breezy track that goes through many different movements, and like I said, it has those moments that are just breezy and fun and light to follow, but then it'll get darker and heavier and morph and change, but it all makes sense and it's all part of this singular journey that you're being taken on. This track and the next one also remind me a lot of their album Me, which came out in 2002, which was just one long track that took you on quite a journey through a lot of different sections, some heavier bits, some funky sections, some like lighter acoustic things. And it all just worked together as one continuous journey, and each track does that here, and you get a lot of the themes reprised and brought back in different ways, and there's a lot of catchy hooks and great sections and moments that just really allow you to rock out and enjoy all of the musicianship on display. Water in Our Hands is an even longer epic, almost 30 minutes, 28 minutes, 51 seconds here, beginning with a killer bass groove, some like watery style guitar lines, some backing claps and interesting percussion touches. And I just love the drumming here, just really sits in the pocket and focuses on such a cool groove. We get some catchy, expressive melodies, some off-kilter, unique piano sections. It's just so cool. And then there's this cool, lighter, breezier section that almost feels like it has a Latin groove of a sort that's returned and reprised back towards the end of the track. There's a darker and moodier section, which almost gets into this kind of talking / rap style vocal, which is really interesting, with some cool instrumental stuff, a leading bass line, some bopping rock sections, some cool grooves, great grand piano playing, some really fun vocal harmonies, and just everything is really well put together in this big sprawling epic that just doesn't feel as long as it is. It breezes by. It has so many fun sections, so many callbacks and returns to things that happened earlier in the track, and enough variety to keep you interested and engaged. So fantastic album overall, and it, like I said, it continues to grow on me over time, and to me that's a characteristic of all the best music, is music that maybe at first you're like, I'm not sure how I feel about this, I know there's something here, but I'm not quite sure I've uncovered it yet, but over repeat listens it really opens up your mind and allows you to really fall in love with it and have that deeper connection because you've spent your time with it. You've really uncovered the hidden layers, and they worm their way into your heart and in your soul as this music just takes you over and becomes a new companion to follow you through your journey in life. So that's what I have for you guys here for this album. I think it's well worth any prog fan's time and attention. I wish Echolyn had a bit more attention on them. They're one of the premier American progressive rock bands that deserve recognition for all of their great contributions. All of their recent albums have all been wonderful, and I've loved them all dearly, and I'm so excited to hopefully hear back from you guys if you've heard this record, if you were part of the pre-order and have listened, what you think about it, and hopefully to bring your attention towards it so that you can order it or listen to it once it officially is released. Like I said, I believe the wider release is in March. So should be a fun album to check out, a leading contender for my favorite albums of 2025, even though, like I said, we're only a couple weeks in. So thank you guys for joining me on this review. Hopefully you appreciated my thoughts on it, and I'll catch you guys in a future episode. Bye everybody, enjoy the music.